Now, continuing on the same theme, we were going to have Jason Strong here in person, but with the vagaries of transport from Tassie, I see that he's eagerly waiting on the screen. So we're very, very pleased to have him to present to us on delivering carbon neutral beef by 2030. Jason is the Managing Director of Meat and Livestock Australia, with experience, knowledge and connections from the farm through to the end consumer product in both domestic and international markets. And following Jason's presentation, he will join the Theme 1 panel a little bit later on in proceedings. So again, Jason, a warm welcome to you and over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Virginia and the team. Just if I can check if you can see my screen. So give me a thumbs up or hear something from the other side. I'll assume you can. It's certainly a pleasure to be here and able to present, although it's virtually, and I did notice it wasn't lost on me Mark showing off and turning up in person and doing all the things that we would wish we could do. But it's nice that at least some of us are getting back to doing some of that. So we're just going to a short presentation on the work that's being done in the livestock and particularly the beef sector around this journey towards carbon neutral by 2030. And Mark flagged that in his talk about one of the commitments that's been made by an Australian industry and how we can stick a stake in the ground and create a goal that gives people something to shoot for, but also I think some urgency and focus on getting there. But also wanted to just touch initially on the value of the China market to the livestock sector, or the red meat sector particularly. And as all of us know, and we tiptoe around it a little bit, there's a broad range of views about the Australia-China relationship, but for agriculture, it's an incredibly important relationship and partnership. And I think there's been some really good points made already about the effort and relationship that's been built over a period of time, and the importance that we are to each other, particularly in agriculture and food. And I want to talk a little bit about the journey that the red meat industry's been on so far, and then a bit about the plan for the future. And you'll see a little bit of a theme flow on from Mark's presentation about how positive I am about not just what we've already done, but what's also in front of us and the opportunity that we have, particularly as we think about working together more strategically. It might be a surprise to some, but China was actually the highest value meat and livestock export market for Australia in 2021. And given some of the commentary, one of the questions we often get is, what do we do with all the product now that we can't send it to China? But our trade relationship with China has grown to be an incredibly valuable relationship over time, and the continual strengthening of that relationship at a trade level is incredibly important. And we all know there's broader discussions going on about the relationship with Australia and China, but at a trade level, the commercial sectors particularly have worked incredibly hard to build a respectful and mutually beneficial relationship, and how we continue to build and manage that relationship is incredibly important. And I think both our industries and all industry organisations are working very hard to do that, because if you think about the growth over time, it's really been quite significant. You go back 10 or 12 years, so go back a bit further than this, and China hardly registered as far as a significant market for Australian red meat and livestock, whereas now it's the last 3 or 4 years, it's consistently been a top 2 or 3 market for us. And as I was saying in the last slide, it was our highest value market last year, and it did only just pip the US by a little bit, but in a very short period of time, it's become the same type of market from a size and value for the Australian red meat and livestock sector that we have thought about, say, Japan and the US as far as market importance for the last 20 or 30 years. So a very short period of time, China's become an incredibly important market for us in that top 2 or 3 group, and we're building that relationship continually to continue to strengthen that. So it's incredibly important that we're conscious of the things that are of value to our customers and consumers on both sides, and how we think about some of these broader issues and challenges that are in front of us. So there's a lot of discussion about sustainability. There's a lot of discussion about our impact on the environment. A lot of discussion about the way that the livestock sector integrates with the environment. When you think about red meat production in Australia, it covers a bit more than 50% of our total land mass. And I know those of you who know the industry well, I know there's red meat production that falls out of these 2 circles, but the majority of our production from a volume and value point of view fall within these 2 circles. So there's a big responsibility that sits with our livestock sector here in Australia when we think about the impact on the environment and how we manage that, and how we have a sustainable approach to producing a high quality, high value red meat product to help feed the world, and we look after the environment in a very positive way and leave it in better shape than what we found. And this is very much part of the commitment that we have. So this goal that many of you would have heard of, the carbon neutral CM30 goal to have the red meat sector carbon neutral by 2030, was first announced in 2017. And people often ask, Mark was talking about the most significant things. Now, the most significant thing that's driven the livestock sector's commitment to being carbon neutral, to improving our interaction with the environment, to being more conscious of our sustainability position, was Richard Norton, who was the CEO of MLA at the time, sticking the stake in the ground and saying there's a CSIRO report that says with the right investment in research and development and the right policy framework, then the red meat sector has the opportunity to be carbon neutral by 2030. And setting that as a goal, an ambitious target for the industry, was the most significant thing that has been done in this space, probably anywhere. And what it means now, as we start thinking about this in a more detailed way, and there's a lot more discussion, and it's much higher priority in broader community discussions, that we've actually been working on this for 4 years, which is really good because it's hard, and there's a lot of work to be done, and we've still got a bit of time to go. But having that run up to today, to the position we're in now, has been incredibly valuable. So making the decision to set that ambitious goal was an incredibly important and very defining moment in this journey to head towards being carbon neutral by 2030. And it's absolutely around this coordinated effort to reduce the total amount of emissions that are being generated and capture those that are coming out the other side. So one of the things that we've developed is this CM30 roadmap. So trying to put together a plan and a path, create a line of sight from where we are to carbon neutral by 2030. And one of the early challenges that we had to tackle was given our position here in Australia, the contribution of the livestock sector to the national inventory at the 2005 baseline level being around about 20%. Was how on earth do we get there from here? And so we've developed this industry roadmap, and the roadmap sets out these 4 chunks of activity around providing industry leadership, so a collective view about our commitment to getting to carbon neutrality, how we develop solutions, programs, opportunities, technologies to help us reduce emissions or emissions avoidance. So how do we actually reduce or avoid producing emissions? And of those emissions that we do produce, how do we then capture them? What are the carbon storage opportunities? And then how do we think about these integrated management systems that allow us to have rapid adoption and accurately and effectively account for our carbon position and be able to measure that measure and report it in an effective and efficient and economical way. So this roadmap has been a really key part of the planning for how we go forward. And these two areas here, this emissions avoidance and the carbon storage areas, we've developed quite significant strategic partnerships in both those spaces now to drive the research and development efforts. And over the last 6 months particularly, there's been approval of significant research and development programs that sit in these two areas. So the other thing we've got to be really conscious of when we're thinking about this roadmap and this journey through to CN30 is being really conscious of providing multiple benefits. And being carbon neutral by 2030 is going to be fantastic. That's a great goal. There's a lot of people that have an interest in that. There's an increasing awareness, increasing interest in the broader community and population about sustainability and the environment, and particularly agriculture's part that they play in that. But there's also some skeptics. There's also some concern about whether it's real or not, about whether it's possible to make change or not. But also, what's it going to cost? How are we going to pay for it? And is this going to mean that we can't continue to do the things that we've done in the past? And of course, the answer to some of that is, well, yes. You know, if it's destructive to the environment, then we've got to reconsider, you know, how we do it. But more importantly, the approach that we're taking on a broad scale basis is, you know, driving our programs from a standpoint of being more productive and more profitable, providing, you know, intergenerational sustainability, and then also leaving the environment in better shape, because we can't have any of those three things without the other. There's no point having an industry that wants to have a multi-generational future if the environment can't sustain it or they can't pay for it. There's no point producing very profitable and productive enterprises if in that process we're not leaving anything behind for the next generation to continue on with that. And, you know, if we're not being profitable, then we don't have the mechanism to actually pay for the things which are required to ensure that we create that sustainable environment that can be multi-generational. And we can never forget that, you know, the key underlying driver need for so much of what we do in livestock agriculture is to feed the world. And the requirements for, you know, protein and nutrition on a global basis aren't getting less. You know, they're going to significantly increase between now and 2050, and we don't have an option to be doing anything which reduces our ability to produce food, and particularly protein. So making sure that we're doing that in a sustainable and productive way is incredibly important. And we've already got a whole bunch of evidence that, you know, we're on the right path, and we're demonstrating progress already. So since 2005, since that really key baseline year of 2005, the greenhouse gas emissions from the Australian red meat sector have reduced by 57%. So more than halved since 2005. So the contribution to the national inventory of the Australian red meat sector now runs at about 10%. So one of the things that we have to do is be able to, you know, better communicate, you know, this progress that's been made, better communicate that the industry has demonstrated that it is possible to do things which people questioned whether they should even be considered. It is possible to reduce the emissions from an industry while it's still being profitable and productive. It is possible to grow an industry, to have it, you know, develop more sophisticated supply chains, which is what we've done in the last few years, particularly while it still reduces emissions. So it's incredibly important evidence to support our efforts and support the opportunity and commitment to continue on that path for carbon neutrality. It's also really important to use this information to, you know, defend and promote the progress that the industry has made. And so often livestock agriculture, and particularly cattle, get targeted as a negative contributor to the environment, where our sector's actually got the best track record so far of progress that's been made in the last 10 or 15 years. So people should be looking at it as an example of what can be done and what can be achieved, not criticising it for what it still actually has. And it's important that we get that communication out there. When we think about lamb specifically, and there's already been some discussion about the path to Paris, for example, which talks about reducing contribution to warming. So carbon neutral is where there's no net contribution comes out of the supply chain to the overall greenhouse gas emissions inventory. So anything that's, you either reduce the carbon production or you capture it. Climate neutral is on the path to being carbon neutral. That means that we're not producing any more than is being cycled out. So we're not adding anything additional to what already exists. Carbon neutral sending us down to zero, whereas climate neutral meaning is we're not adding any more to it. So if you think about the Paris commitment, where we're trying to reduce warming, or the contribution of being climate neutral would actually be zero contribution. And the Australian lamb and sheep meat industry is already there. So the emissions produced by the sheep meat sector are the same or less than what's been produced over the period of time that it cycles out of the system. So it's evidence that we can meet these targets along the way as well. So this piece about where there's so much criticism of the livestock sector and its contribution to the environment is relevant from the point of view that it is a contributor, but it's really not relevant, and it's completely unfair in the criticism which says it's ongoing or larger contribution, because it's actually going the other way. We've halved it since 2005. There's no additional there's no additional contribution from the sheep meat sector already. So we've made more progress than any other industry. So rather than criticising livestock, people should be looking at it as part of the solution to how we actually get there. And we're making a chunk of other investments as well. So improved animal genetics, how we manage our herd and flock, so the kilos that we produce for the footprint that those livestock have, being more efficient around rumen function, so using supplements and additives to reduce methane production. And 5 years ago, people talking about methane being produced by ruminants being something that you couldn't do anything about. Yet we've got red asparaginopsis, which is a seaweed-based product, and 3NOP, which is a synthetic version of a similar thing, which have both proven that they can reduce methane production in a ruminant by more than 90%. So the argument about cattle or sheep produce methane, you can't do anything about it, is not true anymore, because we know that we can get in front of that. So how we actually build on those things and use them as a significant contributor are really important. Improving our pasture base, particularly legumes, so we increase productivity for the animals that we have running on that land, but also increase the soil carbon sequestration opportunity in that country as well. So managing soil carbon is going to be an incredibly important part of what contributes to the CN30 goal. So really excited about the opportunity for livestock and livestock production in agriculture, and it's a key part of the relationship that we have with our export markets, and particularly with the China market, and the opportunity for us to work together on the sustainability credentials of our industry going forward to increase the confidence that our consumers have in our ability to produce not just a highly nutritious, valuable component of our diets and our customers' diets, but also do that in a way that provides long-term and intergenerational sustainability for our industry and the people that are involved in it. Look forward to being involved in the panel.
Thanks, Jason, so much for the terrific presentation, and gives us an excellent understanding of what MLA are doing in the space here. Jason, a few questions have come through from Slido. I'll start with the relating to the 57% reduction that we've seen since 2005. What have been the main drivers of that emissions reduction? And looking ahead at the balance of reduction, what do you see as the hardest emissions to abate in the sector?
Yeah, it's a good one to start with, Will. So some of the big contributors to that 57% reduction are things like reducing land clearing, for example. So the change in land clearing laws in Queensland, which is really contentious, and that was a really difficult thing for agriculture. But while it's been difficult and in a lot of ways negative, this is one of the positives. So we should actually be taking the credit for it and building on that. It's like, if you're going to force us to change the way we do things, let's take the credit for it and build on it going forward. And in addition to that, the increased productivity, so things like genetics, but also improved herd management. So producing more kilos for the footprint that the herd and flock have has been another one of the big contributors as well. The most difficult thing going forward, I think the most difficult thing for us will be managing the contribution to that 10% that comes from the broader herd and flock that's run in the extensive production systems. So we can feed a supplement to an animal in a feedlot and know that we can negate most of the methane that they produce. How do we do the same sort of thing for a cow, which is going to be living for 8 or 10 years in a reasonably isolated environment? I think that's going to be the big challenging one for us to crack. And it was the topic of a discussion that we had with CSIRO on Tuesday. So how do we collaborate on these things? And that it's been a great driver for fantastic industry collaboration about how do we solve some of these big issues together.
Terrific, Jason. We do have more questions. We're going to hold those off for our panel discussion shortly. So thanks, and we'll talk further shortly. I'll hand it back to Virginia. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks.
Well, after hearing from two Australian industry experts, I'm now delighted to introduce you to Mr. Yaming Yuan, the General Manager, Executive Director of Bright Animal Husbandry, part of the Bright Food Group, a multinational food and beverages manufacturing company headquartered in Shanghai. And I do note that Mr. Yuan has been very busy being based in Shanghai, keeping up the flow of dairy products to consumers in Shanghai. So I do wish you well. I thank you for joining us and welcome you to make your presentation today. This will be done in Mandarin and there will be translation by Laura Mattiazzi. So Laura, if you'd come to the stage, we'll start the proceedings. Thank you.
I know I overheard someone say tough gig. I wasn't quite sure what it's referring to. Was it Anthony? Yeah, I know it's a tough gig, so I'm just going to be honest first. Ms. Yuan, before is he online yet? Oh, great, yeah. 袁总，你等一下啊，我有个问题要问问这个什么？Are there any professional translator here in or accredited? All right, so you have a choice. Either you put a earphone in your ear, pretend you didn't hear anything I say, or you come up here and do my job. What would you like to do? Oh, okay, all right, thank goodness. All right, no one's going to pick on me then if that's the case. All right, thank you, Virginia, for introducing Mr. Yuan. 袁总，这个今天I just be with me because I'm in and out a bit, trying to engage our guests, but also at the same time engage you all. So apologies up front, but we have Ms. Yuan now. I'm just going to talk to him, get him started. So 袁总，今天这个会议我们大概能有50-60人吧。在这里，非常感谢您今天那个什么能够跟我们那个参加到我们的大会这种形式，我想跟大家大概介绍一下这个上海的情况，您看看怎么样，袁总，然后我们再
好的 ，OK，
好吗？
没问题，好。
Mr. Yuan is actually working from home, so he has been working from home since the end of March. At one stage, we were concerned that maybe we couldn't really get them online, given, as you appreciate, you might not have the next generation, young Gen Y or millennium to help you with IT, putting things together, but also at the same time, imagine how hard they have been working at nighttime, on weekends, and trying to making sure the supplies are delivered to those people and residents are locked in the house. So I'm so grateful for Mr. Yuan and Bright company to be part of this. And thanks for Will and Coast Group, and especially their group in your office in China connected us. And that's add a lot of credibility for us to get to today. So thank you. 那么袁总，您就开始吧，好吗？我们这已经做完介绍了，谢谢。
好的 ，OK， 好，各位那个先生、各位女士，下午好。我就把我们公司在奶牛养殖方面温室气的排放和减排工作，跟大家做个交流。
Mr. Yuan, thank everyone here today, and he's going to introduce us to Bright Animal Husbandry, what kind of work they've done on greenhouse emission reduction and also trial. Bright Animal Husbandry is actually one of the wholly owned subsidiary of Bright Food, and many of you probably know Bright Food, Bright Dairy, a lot more.
我主要讲3个部分，一个是把我们公司做个简单介绍，然后呢，把我们在奶牛养殖方面的温室气体排放和减排工作做个交流。第3部分呢，我们就是对下一步想在温室气体减排方面做的工作，做个探索。
And I think I hope everything's all right. If Mr. Yuan reading out just the title, which has been translated, I hope you're okay with that. If anything, add in addition, if not elaborate into what is already on the slide, and I'll dive into a bit more. So basically, intro into his company, about their journey in terms of how they practice into the farm management and the whole supply chain of dairy production. And the last one is what are the trials and things they're still going and trying to make sense and trying to aim for their reduction.
那先把我们公司做个简单介绍。
So company introduction first.
我们公司成立于1956年。那我们呢主要是一个在光明乳业股份有限公司下面的一个子公司。光明乳业呢是咱们中国的第3大那个乳制品公司。 那我们公司呢，也是一个多元化的公司。我们现在除了养牛板块，我们还有奶牛育种中心，有种供牛站。我们还在全国承包了20亩土地，在进行青绿饲料的种植。我们还有在全国有5个饲料厂，所以呢，我们是一个多元化的一个牧业公司。然后呢，我们公司呢也是本身一个就是想成为一个中国国内的一个牧业专业化的领先的牧业公司。 那我们一直在朝这方面努力，所以呢，我们一直想说做一个就是就是专业的、可信赖的公司。所以呢，我们也是我们公司的一个精髓。这大概是我们公司的一个简单的一个情况。罗拉。
Ms. Yuan mentioned Bright is actually the 3rd largest dairy company in the country. So I think up there pretty much in the world ranking too, I'm sure. He mentioned about Bright is actually over the years since 1956, pretty fair income history given China was really set up in 1949. It's a bit short from Cole's history or elders, but we're getting there. But Bright is literally involved into a service company, not only just pre-farm production, but also post-farm production, processing, retailing, and exporting, the whole value chain are covered. He mentioned about they've got their own land, and in China, you appreciate it's not wholly owned, it's actually leased the land. They've got hundreds of thousand acres in terms of pasture management. So they have 5 feed processing sites nationwide, and they're really proud. They want to be the leader in the China's dairy industry, and they very much hold to their hearts on being professional, being efficiently run, but also being a reliable supplier to consumers and the value chain partners.
Okay, next. 这是我们在全国的奶牛养殖分布图。 我们现在在全国的6省20市一个自治区，总共有25个大型牧场，总共奶牛存栏是10万头，主要在上海、宁夏、河南、黑龙江都有。罗兰。
You can see those dots, and if you don't understand the Chinese words, I'm sure you understand. There's dots on there. There's it's about 25 large-scale dairy farms nationwide, mainly in the central China and eastern seaboard, 6 provinces, 2 cities, and 100,000 heads of cattle, as is heard.
这是我们在江苏地区的一个万头牧场，这个牧场是总的存栏是13000头奶牛，这是一个很漂亮的牧场。
So this is one of a typical farm they have, which is in Jiangsu province. So for people who don't know where Jiangsu is, you know Alibaba. So Alibaba is in Hangzhou, which is part of Jiangsu. Was that right, Paris? No,
京东
you're from Suzhou, aren't you? Correct. Yes, somewhere next to Zhejiang, somewhere there. But this is just one of a typical farm, and you can see there's a herd size of over 10,000 heads of cattle, which is, I think, Will, in Australian standards, like mind blowing, wouldn't be? But compared to America, pretty much up there, I would say.
Next， 这是我们在上海地区的一个牧场，这是在上海的金山区的一个5000头奶牛场，这个牧场也是在上海地区一个最大的奶牛场。
So this is one of those typical urban farm, which is in one of the suburbs in Shanghai. You can see probably the city landscape from far away. They have about 5,000 heads of cattle. That's benefiting from really short distance in terms of transportation. It's very typical for the group.
这是一个咱们的那个传统的牧场，这个牧场是在咱们上海的一个农场里边。 那这个牧场是建设于那个80年代，所以它的那个挤奶方式啊、饲养工艺啊是比较传统的一个牧场，但整个牧场的产量啊、效益啊都非常好，也是一个非常优美的环境下的一个牧场。
As Yuan pointed out, this is actually in an estate in one of the farms and in the city friend of Shanghai. He mentioned this farm was set up in the 1980s. So even though the way they operate there, you would have thought 1980s probably not efficient and all of that stuff, but he mentioned it's actually run really, really efficiently. They have they house about 5,000 of heads of dairy cattle in that farm.
那这部分我想介绍一下，就是咱们在那个温室气体排放方面做的一些工作。那从咱们奶牛养殖来说呢，主要是它也是个产业链，从饲料加工生产中间有碳排放，在奶牛养殖方面，特别是在奶牛的消化方面，因为肠道的发酵产生那个甲烷排放，那这是一个最主要的排放的源。那第三部分呢，就是咱们的那个牛粪的处理这一块。那目前来看呢，咱们在那个 奶牛养殖环节的那个肠道发酵这块，它所产生的温室气体可以占到46%。那么在粪便处理这块，那可能占的比例可能9%。那我们目前来说，最主要的工作，更多的工作是在牛粪处理这个环节做的工作。因为大家知道，在中国的话，那个进行畜牧业生产，那个环境保护工作是非常重要的。如果你环境保护工作没做好，那你这牧场直接关闭。 所以在整个过程当中，我们是目前来说，我们是把粪便处理这块花了很多的时间和精力去做了一些改善。
Ms. Yuan mentioned this is pretty much from the left to the right-hand side is where the emission occurring, taking place during the milking process, or you can say probably the value chain. At the bottom of that page, you can see the breakdown in terms of the greenhouse emission contribution from the methane production is 46%, most of it driven by fermentation process in the guts of cattle. You appreciate, and then he also mentioned about the farm. He mentioned about there's another 9% contribution from the effluent management. And to his point, he actually made a valid suggestion that the farm has been focusing on more on the 9% contribution. The reason being that even though it's a lower percentage towards contribution of the whole GHG emission, the reason being that in China, they really strong and very strict on environmental protection. So they want to making sure they step up to government regulation expectations and maintain that license to operate. So they've been spending quite a bit of time and efforts to try to solve into that problem.
这是我们在咱们那个上海的生鲜牧场，这是一个牧场呢，是奶牛场是1800头奶牛。我们跟那个国家的奶牛产业体系专家一起做了一个碳足迹的一个测算，那么把整个奶牛场从饲料生产种植到奶牛消化饲喂到粪便处理整个环节的那个碳排放碳足迹，咱们做了一个分析。那么这个奶牛场，咱们从分析结果来看呢，每产1公斤牛奶， 它的二氧化碳排放可以达到1.12公斤。那么从咱们国内前几年的数据来看的话，就是整个1公斤牛奶可能二氧化碳排放可能在2公斤左右。所以这个数据还是我们在2018年做的工作。所以呢，可能我们在这2年也会重新再做一次碳足迹的那个评估工作。这是18年数据，就每公斤奶咱们可以那个有1.12公斤二氧化碳的排放。
So, Mr. Yue mentioned their farms actually focusing on measuring the methane emission pretty much across the whole, and also CO2 emission through the whole milking process. So you see that little kind of blue table, it says project, so they run their own project in the farm, but also, that's kind of industry standard. I mean, on the right hand side, it's a Shenxin farm, which is their own farm. So this is back in the 2018 numbers. He mentioned about industry probably traveling around to milk 1 kg of milk. There's about 2 kilos of CO2 emitted to the air. And on their farm, they sample their own farm. It's recording a lot less than that. It's 1.12. So things might change a bit, but that's roughly where it is compared to industry average.
这是咱们目前来说，在奶牛养殖板块，我们主要是在这个奶牛的营养一块和奶牛的输出这块，我们也是着力做的工作。那么在奶牛营养这块呢，我们主要是提供那个优质输饲料，提供一个完整的日粮配方。那我们现在的奶牛养殖在营养配方这一块，已经脱离了原来那块传统的经验主义的，我们现在都是用那个软件进行分析，使奶牛的那个投喂的饲料跟营养正好满足奶牛的营养需要，也尽量保证不要让更多的饲料浪费，或者说产生过多的那个温室气体。在奶牛输入这块呢，我们主要是对奶牛的内应激管理啊，那个卧床输出啊，都要做工作。那通过输出的管理呢，就是我们也希望提高我们的奶牛单产。那从目前来说，我们25个牧场，我们的奶牛1年的平均每头牛单产在11吨。那么这样的话，就是我们也使我们的通过单产提高，也保证了每头牛的每公斤奶的温室气体排放量降到最低。所以这是我们现在做的工作，我们希望通过奶牛的单产提升来降低每公斤奶的温室气体的排放量。
So 2 particular areas they've been focusing on. One is around nutrition for the cattle, and the other one really around their well-being of these animals. So Mr. Yuan mentioned what they do is in terms of nutrition is really focusing on the feed they provided to the cattle, but also the ration, making sure it's the right ration too. They're using software to analyze, making sure there's a balance between just enough nutrition, keep them going, but also at the same time not surplus nutrition. So the cattle has to, and the extras not only get wasted, but actually emit more emission into the air. And the other part of the well-being for dairy cattle is really looking up after them, making sure maintain them in peak production. The overarching goal for them to monitor, but also achieve, is around, you discontinue those inefficient farms if it's not making commercial sense, if it's not environment friendly, they shut it down, but also at the same time increasing and focusing on that the emission reduction per unit of production.
另外呢，我们是在2019年，我们跟那个中国农科院做了一个研究，就是怎么样减少氨气在咱们牛舍内的排放。因为大家知道氨气是非常刺鼻的不好闻的味道，那么我们的奶牛场是为了研究咱们的奶牛场的这方面分物处理方面的方式改变，怎么样跟周边的环境和谐，所以呢我们做了一个怎么样去减少奶牛场牛舍里边的氨气排放。那这个实验呢，就是我们是通过在牛舍里边的刮风板增加刮风板的次数，希望来降低牛舍内的氨气的排放。
Mr. Yue mentioned they've conducted a joint exercise with the China Science Academy and looking into how do we actually reduce the reduction in terms of green gas gas emission. One thing they actually work it out is around increasing, which you'll see a bit more slide down the track, is increasing the clearance at the cattle's manure on more kind of a frequency on daily basis, and that they have numbers to support that is actually working to reduce that emission. He also mentioned about, you can see that the trial of the data, a trial of the this practice and collection of data is focusing on probably two period. One is around summer production period and also autumn with the dates stipulated there.
这是一个图，大家看到就是这个4个方块呢，是咱们牛舍一个整个牛舍，一个牛舍里边呢有4个区域，这4个区域，我们呢在2个区域里边设置了一个对照组，一个是那个就是那个试验组，那在每个区域里边放了各3个采气点，然后呢在牛舍外呢也放了2个采气点，那我们想通过这个一个试验组的牛舍一天刮8次，咱们对照的牛舍是一天刮风板刮5次，那通过这样的不同的刮风板的运作方式，来看看咱们的整个氨气它的排放量的差异。那整个实验呢，我们是在那个一个是夏季，一个是秋季，做2个不同时间段的那个实验。那右边的图就是我们采用的一些那个采气的仪器的分析啊，包括这些仪器设备。这是咱们在咱们的那个上海的一个金山牧场做的一个实验。
So this is a trial that, can you hear me? Sorry, I'm just, I sort of pointing into the picture. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay, oh good. Miss Mia mentioned this is like a typical kind of a cattle pen. There's about 4 sections. This is passive way. So what they did was they actually set up a test group, which has put 3 collection points. And the other one is the control group. There's another 3 points being set up. There's another 2 that's actually outside the pen. So what they did was they actually monitored the testing group. Where's the testing group? So you got a testing group, there's 3 points here. I think I'm jumping a little bit, but they're looking at monitoring that on daily basis, increasing the number of frequency of
Next， 下一张。Lola next， 这是我们牧场我们用的刮风方式，用的是刮风板。那么我们是在那个对照组每天8次，实验组每天8次是从早上6点到那个晚上11点。那么这个试验组是每天5次，早上6点到晚上9点。那么这样刮风板呢，咱们是这个牛舍是整个牛舍是128米长，所以它刮风板的话，可能那个来回一次可能在50分钟。那这是咱们那个牛舍的一个刮风板的那个情况。前面一张是在刮风状态的那照片，后面一张呢是刮风板刮好以后的照片。
Thank you. The testing group, 8 times they're scraping on a daily basis, and the control group is actually compared on the 5 times daily basis, and every time takes about 50 minutes. You'll see on the left-hand side, this is before cleaning, and after that is post cleaning, and there's some results coming up in the next slide.
那这是一个实验结果，就是我们从整体来看的话，就是每天刮风8次的话，跟每天刮风5次相比，在夏天的话可以减少氨气33%，在秋季可以减少15%。所以说，通过咱们的那个每天刮风板的运行次数的增加，可以有效的降低氨气在那个空气中的排放。所以左边那个图就是咱们在夏季的，那看到就是那个蓝色的是咱们的试验组，那个橘黄色的是咱们的对照组。 所以整体很明显的看到，就是咱们那个通过增加光板次数，可以有效的降低氨气在空气中排放。
So this is the results of the trial. Assuming there's no changes, you can see it's pretty clear. The summer reduction achieved 33%, autumn is about 15%. The left-hand side is the summer reduction graph, and on the right-hand side is autumn. And also, if you see it on the left-hand side, the graph with the summer reduction monitoring, the blue one, you can't really tell, but blue one is for the testing group, and the orange is actually the control group. The gray color is at the outside those two collection points.
Next. 那这是我们牧场主要采用的一些那个分污处理方式。那在牛粪处理这块呢，我们主要是一个通过那个干氢分的工艺，就刚才讲的，通过光分板这样的工艺，把粪污统一收集，然后呢，经过固液分离。固液分离好以后呢，固体部分呢，我们有的是做有机肥，有的呢是重新用在牛床上做卧床垫料。那么液体部分呢，我们有的呢是一部分牧场是做那个沼气。那么还有一部分呢是直接跟我们周边的农田这块呢相结合，我们就直接把这液体部分呢在田里边进行灌溉还田使用，这是我们牧场目前来说主要的一些那个分污变处理的一些工艺。
You might recall in previous slide, he mentioned about they focusing on the 9%, solve the 9% the problem, and this is what they're doing with that manure handling and some of the achievement they have mastered so far.
好，那最后一个就是我们未来想在那个温室气体排减排方面想做的一个探索。那未来呢，就是我们想在那个就是肠道发酵这一块，怎么样去攻关，怎么样攻坚？那的确来说，我们怎么样去判断这个甲烷的排放量减少是一个很困难的事情。所以呢，这方面呢，我们可能会跟那个咱们国内的一些专业研究机构在做这方面的。会做这样的尝试，那主要是通过一个是那个优质饲料利用，包括是一些那个添加剂的使用，包括咱们的那个配方的更精准，通过这几个有效途径，跟国内的一些那个研究机构去做这样的一个试验跟尝试，目的就是减少在奶牛的养殖过程中肠道发酵甲烷的排放量，那这个也是个难点，也是我们未来想做的一些重要的事情。
I hope you don't need me to elaborate more. I think it's translated pretty good. What I do encourage is, given we're actually running out of time, I want to ask are there any questions from the crowd or Slido? Will? Okay, what we do is we might ask Mr. Yuan if he agrees, any of you like to connect with him, talk to him or ask him questions. He's working from home, he's always available. I have to say, I've been really impressed working with him through this period. So let me just thank him. 袁总，那非常感谢，那个我们时间也到了。是这样的，我刚才也问了一下大家有没有问题的。如果您愿意的话，如果他们有问题的话，我们可不可以把您介绍给他们，然后你们可以私下里联系啊，可能会有问题，会有合作啊，或者什么请教您方面的事情。
没问题，卢拉。
OK。
好的 ，OK， 那谢谢。
非常感谢，谢谢你啊！希望你们能够早日能够解封啊！希望。
好的，谢谢，拜拜。
谢谢，
拜拜。
Thank you so much, Mr. Yuan. Thank you.
拜拜。
I might have to do this. I've done it, Virginia. So I haven't lost anyone, hopefully. But over to you.
She didn't realize she was doing that when she took on the role. Well done, thank you. Now we're turning to a virtual presentation again from Philippa Jones, who is from China Policy, a highly valued and long-time supporter of ACBC. Following a career in economic research and development service, Philippa set up China Policy in 2011, advising clients in the public, private and non-profit sectors. Her focus trends towards trade and agricultural policy, food safety, food security, marking her eminently suitable this keynote presentation on green agriculture and China's 5-year plan. So over to Philippa, who is hopefully, Zach, waiting online. Coming through.
I am here.
Oh, so good. Thank you, Philippa. Lovely to see you. Thank you.
Zach needs to undo my video. It says I can't start my video because the host has stopped it. Ah, here I am. Hi, everybody. Very nice to be here, if only virtually. And so interesting just to hear Mr. Yuan's presentation. I'm now going to share my screen and show you my video from here. So, can everybody see that now? And everybody hear me? Oh, okay. Well, we've just seen a fabulous example of modern agriculture in China. And what I would like to do now is to explore a rather bigger picture of what is happening in green agriculture. As you will know, the rural sector is a massive, massive sector in China. We've just been looking at the dairy sector, and of the total ag sector, animal husbandry is 30%, beef is 4% and dairy is 2.5%. And beef and dairy are areas that have had a lot of investment. They are very, in Chinese terms, advanced agricultural sectors mainly. And so what I'm about to show you is much more a picture of what the larger agricultural environment looks like. So first of all, I'm going to look at, alas, at the scale of degradation of the environment in the PRC. Then I want to focus on what's been happening in 2021, which was to many seemed to be a turning point because there was a big focus on green agriculture. This has been building for a long time. It's just that in 2021, the 5-year plan on green agricultural development came out. There was the Conference of the Parties where there was the agreement with the US on methane. And then there was a whole lot of other supporting measures being brought out to help the green transition in agriculture. And then finally, I want to put the whole task into perspective. So let's look at the scale of the problem. For those of you who don't know China very well, this is Heilongjiang, the north, what's known as the black soil area. And this is one of the areas that used to be forested, but it was very, very rich agricultural land. And it was really post-Mao. The land was cleared and the government thought that this would create the breadbasket for China. It still is an extremely fertile area, but it's one of the areas that is a focus of government at the moment to maintain the quality of the environment. They want to keep this soil as black as they can. There's an old story which says you used to be able to put a pair of chopsticks in this type of soil and they would sprout. Now, here's another picture. So I've just been talking the first one about soil degradation, the black soil in the northeast. Here's a picture of Hefei, dry land there. This is a drought in 2019. So in terms of this, our environmental stocktake, we've got soil degradation. One of the other really big issues in China is water scarcity. In northern China, there has been a falling water table for most of this century, and it's hitting really critical level, it's hitting critical loss. I was once talking to a senior agricultural official in Beijing who told me, well, really, we should not be growing food around Beijing. Beijing just does not have the water to support it. One of the big problems with water, and particularly with agricultural water, is pricing it. And because of the position of the rural community in society, and it's always been a community that has not been well resourced or well supported by government, they rely on water, but water has not been priced. So another one I want to talk about is non-point source pollution. One of the big issues in pollution, of course, has been from runoff, from fertilizer and from pesticides. But also, of course, in China, there is big problems in industrial areas with heavy metal pollution. And you will have heard, I'm sure, of the stories of the rice fields when there's rice in particular areas which is not edible because of the heavy metal pollution. And then, of course, we have greenhouse gas emissions, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. But I also just want to mention here, as I put at the end, rural China, that has suffered, I would say, very much in the first decade of this century from depopulation and lack of focus by the central government, is now seen as the economy overall has been slowing. The government's looking for new growth drivers. They realize that they have a massive resource in the countryside, and the countryside is seen very much as one of the next growth drivers. And we see overall a lot of policy focus. We see the government trying to build skills, to bring in the internet, to encourage people back into agricultural jobs. So if I move on now, this is, as I've just said, the look now at greenhouse gas emissions. So agriculture, actually, it accounts for about 8% of greenhouse gas emissions. So you can see here the major emitters in China are, of course, energy. Then we've got industrial production, agriculture at 8%. So a significant contributor. But then within agriculture, what we can see is that land use, and this is very much when we talk about Andalus, it's about fertilizer, really, fertilizer use. Then livestock digestion that we've just been talking about is 26%, rice cultivation around 20%, and more livestock manure issues. So this is the overall agricultural greenhouse gas emissions, which China sees as a significant area for government action now. So as I mentioned, 2021 was the year where we began to see the central government's greening of agriculture agenda appear. So the very first 5-year plan on green agricultural development was released, but also a whole lot more of green plans that will help across the rural economy. So what are some of the things that they're trying to do in green ag development? So we've just talked about the problems with chemicals. So curtailing chemical input is one of the main issues that we see on the agenda. Improving fertilizer and pesticide utilization rate. One of the things that we will come to as I carry on this discussion is how this actually fits into what is happening in 2022. So the situation in China is changing just like it's been changing across the world. Improving land management. And here they're also looking at expanding carbon sequestration. They want to curb farmland degradation. One of the issues that we see rising on the agenda over the last few years is the development of high quality farmland. So we're looking at better services in the farmland, we're looking at better irrigation, we're looking from a that's a technical construction approach, but also in better managing the farmland to improve its structural quality. Another one of the areas is promoting the recycling of agricultural waste, so straw, plastic film, animal manures, all of these things are now being given targets. And one of the things actually I would say about all of these issues, they look like they're big picture issues, but in terms of the planning is going down more and more to detailed levels. And when I've been looking at the planning, I'm quite impressed by the fact that the plans at the moment are not for radical change. It will be on an annual basis. They're looking for incremental change, 1 or 2% in this and 2 or 3% in that. So they are not expecting a massive and immediate change, but China is putting into place incremental change now that they are looking, well, we're looking first of all at this 5-year plan. What China is doing at the moment across many of these plans is it's looking to 2035, and we see a lot of these things are being planned out in the longer term. So this is, as I said, there's this main 5-year plan for green agricultural development, and then there are lots of smaller plans. And so there's this, we're looking at controlling non-point source pollution. We've talked about that. In this, that they're strengthening monitoring, and especially small producers. Now, one of the main issues in China in terms of bringing in environmental controls is dealing with a sector where there are 350 million smallholders. So in terms of rolling things out, in terms of actually monitoring and getting the data, this is an area where there is a great deal and a long-term challenge. As I just said, dairy, like the dairy sector and the bright dairy that we've just seen, these are fabulous modern installations where they can certainly monitor and they know exactly what they're doing. For the vast majority of Chinese farmers and the vast expanse of agriculture, monitoring and understanding what is going on in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and general environmental impact is still very tough. There is major issues in modernizing the pesticide industry. They are bringing in more and more bans on producers, so that producers are no longer able to provide low quality and toxic products. But one of the things that we're seeing is the issue of implementing these plans and these controls across such a fragmented and diversified agricultural population. So what we've just seen in the dairy too, with the greening of animal husbandry, the recycling rate of animal manure is set to reach 80%. We're looking at efficient and supply chain and mechanized and smart operations. These, again, rolling this out across the whole of agricultural production in China is where the issues are to be seen. Conservation farming is another of the areas which they are they're doing a lot of work on, and we're seeing here is a picture of conservation farming and returning straw to the fields. So this is, of course, another area. This is an area where China is keen and can learn from Australia. So finally, I want to look at the task in perspective. Now, I started off with a picture of the farmland in Heilongjiang. This is the task in perspective this year. Weather in China has been a bit like it's been in New South Wales. They've had massive floods. So here was the corn harvest last year, and trying their very best to get the corn in, and you can see it's in a flooded field. One of the pictures I was thinking of using today was a picture of the wheat, of seeding wheat at the moment. And the wheat fields, again, are totally flooded. And so they're seeding the wheat by drones. And this is an interesting area, I think, in agricultural development in China, which I've been thinking of particularly in terms of the pandemic and in terms of the problems of flooding. One of the areas which we've seen a massive uptake since the pandemic is in the use of drones. And I'm sure a lot of the audience will probably know about Chinese drones that are in use in Australian agriculture. I think Australia is a big market for DJI. In China, there was, in the most mechanized parts of China, in 2019-20, there was 15 or 20% use of drones. And the sale and the use of drones has just shot up through the pandemic. There has been such a difficulty with getting people into the fields and with farming that it's one of those unintended consequences, just like we've all moved to virtual work, so the drones have come into agriculture. So just finally, I want to talk here about this task ahead. One of the issues with green agriculture and with bringing in China's 5-year plan, in implementing this 5-year plan on green agriculture, is, of course, what's happening with the geopolitical tension. So we've seen, unfortunately, I would say over the last 5 years, incrementally, but over the last couple of years, much more directly, a move to self-sufficiency. 5 years ago, when China was setting out its annual plans, it was talking about putting land to fallow, about making better use of international markets. These days, we see less and less mention of using international markets. For the first time this year, in the #1 document, which comes out in the early part of the year, in February, about the annual agricultural plans, trade was not mentioned. Now, this was probably, this is a political decision, most likely. And of course, it's not that trade is not going to continue, but it was surprising to us that it actually was taken out of the document when it is something that has always been there. So China is feeling the pinch in terms of focusing on self-sufficiency. Not only has it had its diplomatic and political tension with countries like Australia and with Canada, but now with the invasion of Ukraine, there is the problems starting with BRI partners. And Ukraine was a big exporter to China. Then we've got the issues that we've talked about. Grain supply and cutting chemicals is part of this. Grain supply is part of the self-sufficiency mantra, and it's going to be very, very difficult to cut chemicals while grain supply is still so high on the agenda. Well, when the imperative that grain supply trumps everything else, reducing chemicals is going to be very difficult. As I've mentioned, the sector is dominated by small farmers, as I've said, 350 million smallholders. But what is also a growing problem, or a growing realization, is the resource and the talent gap in agriculture. As you will know, there have been, since the 90s and the 2000s, a massive migration of labor to the eastern seaboard, where there's better living, where the factories were humming and providing the goods for the rest of the world, and there was depopulation of the agricultural land. Now, as I mentioned, there is this focus as well on rural areas as being a new growth engine. But there is nevertheless this problem with this talent gap. Schooling is not good. There is also, when we're talking about drones and how China would like to be improving and smartening agriculture, we find that the actual skill set and the ability with modern tech that is amongst the agricultural population is very low. At the moment, also, there is no effective eco-compensation program in the ag sector. We see a lot of talk about it. There has been some interesting stories. There's a story there's the problems of agricultural film everywhere. So film is used a great deal, and it creates a massive amount of pollution. Recently, there's been one pilot where farmers have been given 1 kilo for every 10 kilos of agricultural film that they collect, and they're given another kilo free. So this was one way that they were finding they could some sort of compensation, but larger compensation, how agriculture can be used as offsets in greenhouse gas emissions. This is the programs which have yet to be rolled out, and I'm sure that it will be one where China will find a way of doing it, but as yet we're not seeing anything in the sector. One of the things is that there's this campaign at the moment to develop 1,000 eco-friendly farms, and we're watching this one. There's the first about 130 or 40 or so have been designated. And then finally, in terms of these systemic problems, alas, actual investment in the rural sector is falling. So we know overall in China that there is a slowing economy. There has been recurrent hits through COVID. There was a big hit, of course, in early 2020 with COVID. China has done reasonably well until just recently. And recent problems, we are really unsure of what the fallout is going to be. What we do know, and what we saw yesterday, is the Politburo is absolutely doubling down on zero COVID. So zero COVID has as we see very much the impact that it has in the cities. It has a massive impact in agriculture too. It has affected logistics, it's affected planting, it's affected right across the board. And it's particularly been up in Jilin, the Heilongjiang, the Jilin area, which is one of the bread baskets. So there has been a lot of difficulty with planting this year. But overall, So then, we have yet to see what's going to happen here. But overall, as you see from this graph on the right-hand side, agricultural investment in 2021 has fallen. This is public expenditure. So if the government's expenditure is going down, it has said that it expects the private sector to be investing, but without the fundamental investment coming from the state, there's very difficult for the private sector to come in. And of course, the type of investment that the state is looking for are really in areas that should be state-led. Most projects in agriculture have long time frames and low profit, and they're not attractive to the private sector. Apart, of course, from big, you see these big dairies, like we've seen this great dairy with Mr. Yuan. But as I've said, this is the modern agricultural sector, which is doing well, but is a very, very small proportion of China's overall agricultural sector, which is going to take a long time to bring in a greening and to benefit from the plans that are going in place at the moment. And finally, I'd just like to, my take-home message is just to repeat again that the food security imperatives and the highly fragmented sector all indicate that in terms of green agricultural development as a whole in China, we're going to see very incremental change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philippa, for such an insightful view of the agri-business sector in China and some of the challenges there. We are moving to our panel, so we'll be rejoined with Jason Strong. And my first question actually is to you, Philippa. So you've outlined some of the major challenges in soil degradation, water scarcity, greenhouse gas, and the heavy metal pollution. I think with the exception of the last item there, we heard previously from Mark Allison about Australia's journey over the last 40 years. For example, from the soil degradation of the 70s through to market, global leading no-till practices here now, and obviously significant investment and in water regulation and management here. With the knowledge that we have and with the challenges that you've just laid out, how does Australian agribusiness get involved to help solve the bigger challenges in China?
Well, I just think that there is a fabulous convergence there between the problems that we've had and the problems that China still has today. I wouldn't say that it's not had them before. Of course, we have a very long history of agricultural cooperation, and particularly a long history of scientific. There's been a agricultural cooperation program with China for the last 40 years. I think, as other speakers have mentioned, we have to live with the political problems that we have at the moment, and we have to, of course, maintain our partnerships, maintain our friends, talk to them about what we can do, and let's hope that as the political relationship improves, we will find our way back to helping them out in the areas where we have so much expertise.
Thanks, Philippa. And Jason, on a related topic, so you spoke earlier about China as our most valuable red meat market in terms of product revenues, export revenues. Do we have an idea of the opportunity or the size of the opportunity in our current or potential export of services and insights and know-how and intel, particularly in the context of Philippa's points around the challenges in China?
Yeah, well, I think it's really significant. And when we look at the types of trade relationships that have been built in the last 5 or 10 years, you look at our free trade agreements and the access that we now have to a whole range of markets. But you also look at the global environment and the things which are becoming interesting to communities and consumers all over the world. If you look at sustainability alone, for example, I think there's a huge opportunity for us to work more closely with our customers in countries like China, where we have a real shared interest in having a long-term, sustainable, successful business. And if you think about sustainability impact on the environment, if we're making progress here and we have products which are seen as more sustainable, but the same perceptions not reflected by our customers or the consumers in China, then it makes it tougher to actually sell our products into that market. And I think we're getting to a point where we're probably even there, where there's these pre-competitive areas like sustainability, human nutrition, and animal products that are really pre-competitive issues, and they're not really things which we are going to use as trade advantage. They're things which are going to build global consumer confidence in red meat, and there's a huge opportunity for us to work together with our customers, and particularly countries like China, in those areas.
Fantastic, Jason. Jason, you spent your whole life in the red meat sector, and you're a pioneer in the grading, so carcass grading and quality standards of Australian red meat. You've heard Philippa speak about 350 million producers across the supply chain, and I think the equivalent for us in the red meat sector would be around about 50,000 producers. So not the same order of magnitude, but still quite fragmented. What are some of the lessons that you've learned from that early work around what is now industry-wide adoption of standards and traceability, and what insights can you share for those who are working on the same in China?
Yeah, look, one of the beautiful things about livestock production is you have this massive amount of flexibility. That's a nice way of saying we're incredibly fragmented in the way that we think about stuff, which gives us the ability to respond to challenges. It gives us the opportunity to innovate, gives chance for people to row their own boat, be very free spirits. Also makes it really hard to implement whole of industry, whole of sector solutions. And I think where we got to with MSA, it was that common commitment to producing a high quality, more consistent product, and being able to demonstrate the benefit from doing that, and then the industry getting behind that and it becoming an adopted standard effectively. Sustainability is going to be the same thing. We still have quite a variety of views about sustainability and its value and animal agriculture impact on the environment, right from it doesn't exist right through to it's the end of the world. And if we could stop these two extremes talking, that would be great, but they're not going to. So in the meantime, those of us in the middle have got to work out how do we corral as many people as we can to develop this environment where we can be profitable and productive, and we can create intergenerational sustainability, and we can leave the environment in better shape. And I think we know enough already where we can do all those three things, and that's going to be incredibly important for us going forward.
Thanks, Jason. And just a follow-on question. So you laid out the carbon neutral 30, CN30 roadmap, and the components of industry leadership, greenhouse gas avoidance, carbon storage and systems. What do you see as the most challenging component to deliver against those CN30 goals?
I think there's going to be, in those two chunks around avoidance and carbon capture, there's some really big ticket items in those that they're hard to solve, but also they're hard to then apply on a whole of industry basis. And a broader comment, industry's taking responsibility for their contribution to the inventory is really important. It's really easy for people to talk about Scope 3 emissions. A lot of the discussion about Scope 3 emissions, once you get past awareness, is avoidance. Our emissions are X, but 60% of them are Scope 3. So what can we do about that? It's like, well, if everyone took that approach, then we're really going to have a challenge. And I think that's really important for us to take ownership of the things that we contribute to, and not just find solutions, but find ones that can be applied on a broad scale basis. And our biggest challenge is going to be, the rangelands production systems where we have, livestock in broad scale, pasture environments where, we've got to manage a 8 or 10 year life of a cow, or 5 or 6 year life of a ewe, that's contributing to the production system, and also to the environment. And how we actually apply those whole scale solutions will be a big challenge for us.
Thanks, Jason. And Philippa, so another question for you. It came up, you spoke briefly about the last 12 months, US and China have been discussing, they've been working together on a methane reduction plan. How is that progressing? And are there any opportunities that Australia can participate in that or collaborate?
Well, I very much hope so. But what is interesting is that there was a great flurry of activity after COP26, and we saw lots of things in the press, lots of reports, but we haven't seen very much since. There has been a little bit of discussion, and it's been not been focusing on agriculture. So my gut feeling, I suppose, for want of a better word, is that I think that things are going to be a bit slow for a while. That we're watching out, and we will let you know as soon as we see any information about what China, or any inclination of what they're going to be doing in methane. They're meant to have this action plan on methane finalized before November. So, we're just keeping an eye on it, but we haven't heard anything.
Thanks, Philippa. And one last question, Jason, on this topic. So it's from the audience. Is the MLA working with an equivalent Chinese industry partner to collaborate on the CN30 program? Or if not, do you have intentions to? And can you share what's happening there?
Yeah, so right now, no, we're not. But I think this feeds into what I was saying before about some of this global collaboration, and there's some countries where we have longer standing established research collaboration agreements, and we're absolutely looking at what's possible. And I think we'll be in a position in a pretty short period of time, a short number of years, where we'll get a chance to test some of that collaboration and be able to use the experience from countries where we've probably got deeper research sharing relationships, to be able to use that experience in markets like China. But it's incredibly important for us when we're thinking about our global red meat sales and purchase position, those relationships, that we think more broadly about the common issues, and sustainability is absolutely one of those. So we should keep pushing.
Fantastic. So I think thanks so much, Jason and Philippa, for joining on the panel. We're about to have a break for afternoon tea, but I think I'd just like to thank you so much for joining and summarise. I think this first section of today, it's probably fair to say that we have very obviously quite a lot of opportunities for collaboration and significant overlap between the challenges that we have here in Australian agri-methane emissions and also in China. But I think that it's also quite honest to say that we're at the beginning of that journey of collaboration. So I thank you very much for your contributions today, and look forward to continuing this as we go forward. Thanks, Jason and Philippa.
Thanks, Will.
And I just